Introduction. I can admit it freely now. All my life I've been a patsy. For as long as I can recall, I've been an easy mark for the pitches of peddlers, fundraisers, and operators of one sort or another. True, only some of these people have had dishonorable motives. The others, representatives of certain charitable agencies, for instance, have had the best of intentions. No matter. With personally disquieting frequency, I have always found myself in possession of unwanted magazine subscriptions or tickets to the sanitation workers' ball. Probably this long-standing status as soccer accounts for my interest in the study of compliance. Just what are the factors that cause one person to say yes to another person, and which techniques most effectively use these factors to bring about such compliance? I have wondered why it's that a request stated in a certain way will be rejected, but a request that asks for the same favor in a slightly different fashion will be successful. So in my role as an experimental social psychologist, I began to research the psychology of compliance. At first, the research took the form of experiments performed for the most part in my laboratory and one on college students. I wanted to find out which psychological principles influence the tendency to comply with a request. Right now, psychologists know quite a bit about these principles, what they are and how they work. I have characterized such principles as weapons of influence and will be discussing some of the most important of them in this book. After a time, though, I began to realize that the experimental work, while necessary, wasn't enough. It didn't allow me to judge the importance of the principles in the world beyond the psychology building and the campus where I was examining them. It became clear that if I was to understand fully the psychology of compliance, I would need to broaden my scope of investigation. I would need to look to the compliance professionals, the people who had been using the principles on me all my life. They know that what works and what doesn't. The law of survival of the fittest assures it. Their business is to make us comply, and their livelihoods depend on it. Those who don't know how to get people to say yes soon fall away. Those who do stay and flourish. Of course, the compliance professionals aren't the only ones who know about the use these principles to help them get their way. We all employ them and fall victim to them to some degree in our daily interactions with neighbors, friends, lovers, and family. But the compliance practitioners have much more than the vague and amateurish understanding of what works than the rest of us have. As I thought about it, I knew that they represented the richest vein of information about compliance available to me. For nearly 3 years, then I combined my experimental studies with a decidedly more entertaining program. I systematically immersed myself in the world of compliance professionals, salespeople, fundraisers, advertisers, and others. My purpose was to observe from the inside the techniques and strategies most commonly and efficiently used by a broad range of compliance practitioners. That program of observation sometimes took the form of interviews with the practitioners themselves, and sometimes with the natural enemies, for example, police, bunco squad officers, consumer agencies, of certain of their practitioners. At other times it involved an intensive examination of the written materials by which compliance techniques are passed down from one generation to another, sales manuals and the like. Most frequently, though, it took the form of participant observation. Participant observation is a research approach in which the researcher becomes a spy of sorts. With disguised identity and intent, the investigator infiltrates the setting of the interest and becomes a full-fledged participant in the group to be studied. So when I wanted to learn about the compliance tactics of encyclopedia or vacuum cleaner or portrait photography or dance lesson sales organizations, I would answer a newspaper ad for sales trainees and have them teach me their methods using similar but not identical approaches. I was able to penetrate advertising, public relations, and fundraising agencies to examine their techniques. Much of the evidence presented in this book then comes from my experience posing as a compliance professional or aspiring professional in a large variety of organizations dedicated to getting us to say yes. One aspect of what I learned in this 3-year period of participant observation was most instructive. Although there are thousands of different tactics that compliance practitioners employ to produce yes, the majority fall within 6 basic categories. Each of these categories is governed by a fundamental psychological principle that directs human behavior, and in so doing gives the tactics their power. This book is organized around these 6 principles. The principles: reciprocation, consistency, social proof, liking, authority, and scarcity, are each discussed in terms of their function in the society and in terms of how their enormous force can be commissioned by a compliance professional who deftly incorporates them into requests for purchases, donations, concessions, votes, or assents. Finally, each principle is examined as to its ability to produce a distinct kind of automatic, mindless compliance from people, that is, a willingness to say yes without thinking first. The evidence suggests that the ever-accelerating pace and informational crush of modern life will make this particular form of unthinking compliance more and more prevalent in the future. It will be increasingly important for the society, therefore, to understand the how and why of automatic influence. It's worth noting that I have not included among the 6 principles the simple rule of material self-interest, that people want to get the most and pay the least for their choices. This omission does not seem from any perception on my part that the desire to maximize benefits and minimize costs is unimportant in driving our decisions, nor does it come from any evidence that I have that compliance professionals ignore the power of this rule. Quote the opposite. In my investigation, I frequently saw practitioners use, sometimes honestly, sometimes not, the compelling "I can give you a good deal" approach. I chose not to treat the material self-interest rule separately in this book because I see it as a motivational, given as a goes without saying factor that deserves acknowledgments but not extensive description.